Let's have a chat with our friend Alfred Adler again. He was a tough old bastard, you know. He was really tough. He may not have been as smart as Freud, IQ-wise, and he may not have had the depth and the breadth of imagination that Jung had. But when it came to practical application, he really was very, very special. I would like you to consider today, I've asked you to consider it before, I'd like you to consider it again now. If you had a script for your life, if you had a narrative, a fiction for your life, what would that fiction be? What would that story be? Are you playing the reluctant hero? Are you living a rags to riches story? Are you in the midst of a romantic comedy? Are you in a tragedy? Like, what is your life? What's the flavor of your life fiction? And what character are you playing? The likelihood that your life is clean of this is, well, frankly, it's zero. It's zero. I don't think humans know how to live outside of stories, outside of fictions, outside of narratives. So let's assume you have one. Let's assume there's a script. I remember John Wareham wrote a book. I want to say it was called The Life You Were Born to Live. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But he spoke a lot, John Wareham, about, no it wasn't, it was called something else, unconscious scripts that we get from our parents, that we get from society, that we get from culture. It's mainly from parents, but you could, in his view, get it from religion, society, culture. What is your script? Is it restrictive? Are you not doing certain things that you could otherwise be doing because it's just outside of your script? So how do we become aware of what our script is? Well, probably you could say that the kind of movies and books that you already enjoy might be an indication of the kind of story you've created. The kind of books you read and the characters you gravitate to, they could be variations of who you perceive yourself as being. And you could say, well, so what? So what if I have a fantasy in which my life is a narrative that is like a romantic comedy? So what? So what if I have a narrative where I am like the reluctant hero, or I'm, I used to really like books by David Gemmell. He was the one who wrote, you've probably seen Labyrinth, but he wrote a series of books called The Waylander, which was like the Clint Eastwood cowboy, the Toshiro Mifune masterless samurai, but in a sort of a Lord of the Rings environment. I loved it, Waylander. And I remember coming across this idea of life scripts years ago, and I was like, well, so what if I loved Waylander and I think I'm Waylander? That's cool, isn't it? But you have to think, what are you telling your unconscious you are likely to do or not do, and what are you likely to create? So say, for example, you want to live a romantic comedy. What are you going to do when tragedy enters your life? What are you going to do when your relationships don't play out romantically? Because they don't. They don't. Relationships from beginning to end do not follow the format of our ideas of romance. Romance is fantasy. The word, God, I think in Spanish and I think in Italian as well, and in French, roman means novel. It means fantasy. Romantic means novel-like. It's a fantasy. The very word is fantasy or fiction. Romance. It means fiction. So what are you going to do? If you're like, oh, I'm living as the character, I guess I'm Jennifer Aniston in this story. Everything is so cute and quirky and all my friends are funny and blah, 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 and then it's not. It isn't. What do? You're not. Sometimes when there's trauma in people's lives, for me, with a background in psychology, I always felt it was about the individual and like their background and their story and intergenerational trauma and what their parents taught them. But actually a lot of trauma is also cultural trauma, meaning When your life doesn't play out the way the culture wants it to, or the way the culture will tell you it does, or in a way that means the culture won't support you, that's traumatic. When you start living outside of the tribe or beyond the tribe, it's traumatic in and of itself. To use the other example, Waylander. Waylander's cool. He's Clint Eastwood. He's Toshiro Mifune. Okay, these guys are homeless. Okay. These guys, their stories are really boring unless there's fights. So they thrive on conflict. In fact, you could argue The Man with No Name of the spaghetti westerns, Clint Eastwood, and Toshiro Mifune, how boring would those films be? Like a Kurosawa movie with no fights in it. What would you watch it for? You watch like Toshiro Mifune just walk around 16th century Japan doing what? Reciting poetry and gambling? I mean, well, that's not a great film. So I was internalizing the idea of loneliness and conflict. And guess what was showing up in my life? Oh, interesting. We need stories. Stories give us meaning. Stories give us a sense of purpose in the world. But they can free you, but they're more likely to restrict you because the story was written by somebody else in the past. And you're you in the present moving into a future. Be aware of these stories. Be aware of these life fictions. And when problems show up, the second Adlerian point I'd like to make for this video, and I've made it before, but I'm going to remind you, is look at your life story, look at the fictions of your life, look at the mythology you've created about who you are and the mythology of what your life is all about. Are you a martyr? Are you a hero? Are you a rebel? Does that free you or does it restrict you? When problems show up, assume that they're what you want. I'm not saying that you do want them. I'm saying from a philosophical Adlerian belief challenging perspective, assume you want those problems and ask, what do I benefit by having this problem? You will get further doing that than by gazing into your own navel and disappearing into it and trying to find the source of it in childhood trauma. I assure you. Not that that is useless, just that for us on a day-to-day basis, assume you want that problem and ask, what benefit do I get from having this problem? You'll go further, faster, trust me. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and for your attention, and I look forward to speaking to you again tomorrow.